I got a pre-production ZV-E10 Mark II for review over on my main channel, more of a photography audience over there. In this video on my second channel here, I'm going to talk all about what this camera is built to do, which is create incredible videos in the easiest way possible. And I'm also going to give you a few tips on how to make this already incredible camera even better. A quick intro to me, since this channel is proper new. I am Taylor Jackson, a photographer and video creator from Canada. My main photography channel is up over 600,000 subscribers, but on this channel is where I talk all about how I created that channel and how you can do the same. I'm going to attempt to tone down the gear bro talk on this channel a lot more and make things as simple as possible, so subscribe to this channel if that sounds like something you might enjoy. All the footage that you're going to be seeing in this video is from my past weekend of photographing 3 weddings, plus a trip to Lindsay's parents' barbershop singer trailer park, where you have to be an active barbershop singer in order to get a trailer here. The concept is so wild that Glenn from Superstore is filming a reality show here today, and I'm probably on it. First off, it is super lightweight and compact. You can easily carry it around all day without feeling weighed down. The design is great. The screen flips out and faces you from the side, making it easy to frame your shot and keep an eye on everything while you're recording. The one downside of the screen is if you are using a mic with a cable, it will cover up a little bit of screen at the top, but that said, Sony has already solved this problem by putting a hot shoe connector that will accept one of their mics, or the DJI mic adapter that will go right into the hot shoe. Why this is called a hot shoe? It's from the flash photography days. Sony now calls this a multi-shoe since it does a lot more things. And the most common way that we run audio now is with the DJI Mic 2 wireless kit straight into this multi-shoe. So that means no cable connecting into the microphone port. We'll also talk more about audio in other videos on this channel, but we use clip-on lav mics, which are plugged into the DJI packs that go wirelessly back to the receiver. So you don't have the DJI wireless clipped on here and you have something that looks a little bit more like this, which is the lav that I'm using right now. The Sony ZV-E10 Mark II also has a red light up here called a tally light, and it also lets you know when you are recording. So if the camera's across the room and you're recording yourself, it's very easy to see that you are in fact recording. One of the best features is the autofocus. The Sony ZV-E10 Mark II has Sony's industry-leading fast autofocus, which means it locks onto subjects quickly and keeps them in focus. This is a huge plus for creators because you don't have to worry about blurry footage or constantly adjusting focus. I just have full trust that this camera is going to get the shots in focus in most environments. If you are in a more complex environment with lots of faces around, you can use the touchscreen quickly to track subjects or focus on a specific thing. Sony's great autofocus also introduces another problem, that it's so good at finding your face that if you're trying to show it something, so like this, I'm trying to show this to the camera, it's just gonna ignore this and focus on my face. What Sony's done in this camera is if you hit the button in the bottom corner here, it's actually product showcase mode, so that if I'm showing a product to the camera, it will know to put the product in focus and then go back to my face whenever I put the product down. Now let's talk about audio for a minute. It's important to have good audio, and it is often overlooked by cameras in this specific space. Here I am speaking into the mic. I'm trying to cancel out the copyright audio. Tim is moving chairs. I don't want those chairs, Tim. This is just a little wind diffuser up here, by the way. You have a mic under it that can do a few things. It can modify itself to pick up audio from different locations. Even if the camera itself doesn't move, that means it can go forwards if it knows it's recording somebody speaking to the camera. Or if you're looking for something more environmental, it knows to go full wide room mode. And honestly, it's pretty good for a voiceover mic. This all said, well, the built-in mic is pretty good. It is important to upgrade your audio as soon as you can. Now, let's talk about other things worth upgrading. This kit lens is incredibly inexpensive when bundled with the camera, and for sure get it. It's the updated version of the kit lens and it's very nice. It's called a power zoom, which means you can actually zoom with the slider up here on the front, or there's a little zoom slider on the side. Some lenses that you get, you have to physically twist the barrel in order to zoom. This one, you do not have to. And now a great feature of this camera is that you can change lenses on it, and we're gonna talk about the ones that I like the best soon. On the front of the lens, you're going to see a lot of numbers and letters and signs that are very confusing. The two that are the most important, and the two, if you're searching online, are gonna be in the main title of most products. The first is millimeters, and the second is the f-stop or the f-value. We'll talk about millimeters first. The smaller the number, the wider the lens. An 11 millimeter lens is going to be wider than this here 16 millimeter lens. Some lenses zoom, some do not. This lens here zooms, so it says 16 to 50, which means it zooms from 16 millimeters up to 50 millimeters. Now, here's where camera companies get really confusing. These millimeters are based on old film cameras and the film size. Some digital cameras run the same size of sensor that 35 millimeter film was, some do not. If you're looking at a bigger pro camera, like the ones that I use over on the main channel, it's pretty likely that's going to have the same sensor size as 35 millimeter film. Those sensors and cameras are usually very expensive and also physically pretty large. A 16 millimeter lens on that camera is actually a 16 millimeter lens. It's very easy. The size of that sensor is often called full frame. The Sony ZV-E10 II uses a smaller sensor to make the camera smaller and also to make it cost less. But what this means is that any of the millimeters you see are actually going to be multiplied by 1.5. And instead of full frame, this sensor is called a crop sensor or an APS-C sensor. So a 16 millimeter lens on this camera is actually 16 times 1.5, which equals 24 millimeters, at least in terms of equivalent when it comes to full frame. I mention this not to confuse you, but to know that if you're watching a video, maybe a Life of Riza video, where she's suggesting that you use a 20 millimeter lens, that is a 20 millimeter lens on her full frame camera, which would actually be, if you put the same 20 onto this camera, it would actually be 20 times 1.5, which would be a 30 millimeter lens, which is not so ideal for vlogging. For vlogs and self-filming of any sort, I am a huge fan of that 20 millimeter or wider lens. My favorite lens for the Sony ZV-E10 II is actually the 11 millimeter f1.8. It's wide enough to vlog with, but it also allows you to add some other features inside the camera, which you'll need, and they also introduce a little bit of crop value beyond just the regular APS-C 1.5 times crop. The only limitation of this camera is that it does not come with in-body image stabilization. It's also called IBIS a lot of the time on the internet, which means that in other cameras with it, the sensor will actually move around inside the camera to compensate for handheld shake. This camera doesn't have IBIS, but what it does have is a really advanced digital IBIS. There are two options, standard, which is okay, and active, which is actually really great, and you're seeing it on the screen here. Active, while being great, comes with a much larger crop, and what I mean by crop is that it's cropping into the sensor a little bit more, so it's able to stabilize the footage by bouncing the frame around rather than moving the actual physical sensor. And that means if you're looking at that 11 millimeter lens, and we'll round this, so 11 times 1.5, roughly 16 millimeters, but when you add active stabilization, it adds an additional crop, which makes it look a little bit more like 20 millimeters, maybe 22 millimeters. They don't exactly tell us what it is. And that's still fine for vlogs and self-filming, but if you're trying to use this here kit lens that starts at 16, you see quickly how it ends up at 30 millimeters, and 30 millimeters when you're trying to vlog like this is just gonna be way too close to your face. Now, some of Sony lenses will actually come with OSS, which is optical steady shot, which is their image stabilization, but it's in the lens rather than in the camera body. The kit lens here comes with OSS, which means it does add a little bit of stabilization, and it's definitely useful if you're very careful. However, if you're using a lens without it, you're definitely going to have to be using the active stabilization if you are handheld. So my recommendation is to get the widest lens you can for self-filming. The 11 millimeter is really, really nice on this camera because at the end of the day, it's no longer going to be 11 millimeters, but it will show the space and also your face in the frame. The other number on the lens that's important is the f value. F-stop is how much light is getting in. Lower numbers will let in more light. The 11 millimeter lens is an f1.8, which means it's very good in low light. This kit lens here is an f3.5 to 5.6, which means the f-stop changes as you zoom in. So at 16 millimeters wide, it lets a decent amount of light in, but at full zoom, it's going to be pretty dark. Outside, this is not a problem, but inside in low light, it starts to become a problem. Another thing digital took from the film days is ISO. It was originally film sensitivity to light, and now it's just your sensors sensitivity to light. Sony sensors are really great at high ISO, but there definitely becomes a point where you crank the sensitivity too much and you're going to get really grainy images, just something to be aware of if you are using lenses with higher f-stops. Generally, one of the benefits of lenses that don't zoom is that they're designed to let a little bit more light in. So what you lose in versatility of zooming, you gain in lower light performance, keeping that ISO down and getting cleaner looking images. Now, another thing your f-stop number controls is your depth of field. So if you want the most out of focus background possible, you want to have the lowest f-stop number possible. The good news is you don't really have to deal with this on the ZV-E10 II. There's actually a button up here that will do that for you. If you want to have a blurry background, you hit this button and it will maximize it. You hit the button again and it puts everything in focus. Blurry backgrounds also let in the most amount of light, which means the ISO sensitivity can be lower. Clear backgrounds dial the f-stop up and require more light or more ISO sensitivity. Again, fine if you're outside in the daylight, but as soon as you come inside, it might become a problem. Let's talk about the camera a little bit more now. I mentioned you have a microphone input if you need it, but you also have a headphone out as well. So if you're filming something very important and you want to make sure that the audio is great, you can listen to what you're recording. Typically, it's actually pretty rare for us to be monitoring audio unless we're doing a commercial job, but for YouTube, we usually just make sure that the levels are bouncing there when I speak. They should be going up. When I'm silent, there shouldn't be a whole lot of audio there, rather than always having headphones on. There's a card slot for an SD card. My workflow is editing on a computer, so I'm loading all my footage onto a hard drive and editing from there. Above the card slot, there's also a USB-C port for charging the camera. The USB-C port also makes your camera work like a webcam easily, which is really nice. The ZV-E10 II also uses this larger battery, which is very, very nice. You can either buy a second battery if you're going to be out all day, or just bring a charger brick if you want to recharge while you're out in the world. There are also a lot of slow motion options on this camera, but in all honesty, I rarely use them. The sensor in this camera is from the much more expensive Sony A6700, which is nice, and it means that you get 4K 60, which means you're able to record 4K footage and get slower motion footage if desired. The really slow motion footage is usually just in HD, which sometimes looks a little bit weird when put into a project with regular 4K footage. The S&Q mode up here can be configured to whatever slow motion you want it to be, so you can just bump over to it quickly when needed. The other side of this dial is for photography, which is something we're not really going to talk about in this video, even though this is a fine photography camera. I mentioned 4K, so let's talk about my most common settings. I don't really care to change a whole lot on this camera, and out of the box it actually comes set up pretty well. I verify that in the menu I am set to 4K and then 30 or 24 as a frame rate. TV, at least in North America, is usually at 30 frames per second and movies are at 24. I'm typically on 30 for YouTube, but you can pick 24 if you want to get ultra cinematic. The rest of the settings I change are either on the screen or in the FN menu button up here. The camera comes set to intelligent auto mode, which is very good for a lot of things and very easy to pick up and just start filming. I personally would switch mine to program auto, so it opens up a few bonus controls. If the image is too dark or too bright, you can tap exposure compensation and you can go either left or right if you want the image brighter or darker. You can also go into the settings and set exposure compensation as one of your back dial or wheels if you find yourself using it a lot. I personally find myself shooting in aperture priority mode most of the time. This is where you set the f-stop number, and I set mine to as low as possible to give you that shallow depth of field anytime you point a camera at someone's face or a subject. Sony has released this Cinevlog format, which makes it very easy to get cinematic looking footage. It's fun to use and creates some really great looks. I typically don't use it though, and I just change these few things instead. In the FN menu, I turn skin smoothing off because I don't know why it comes set to medium, or maybe it just did on this unit. I set that to off. Then the other two things that I change, there are picture profiles, and some of them are good, some of them are a bit weird. I like picture profile 11, which is commonly called Cinetone. It's just a very nice and pleasing color palette and doesn't require much editing in post. I also set my white balance manually to cloudy, and this is a look that I like, and it doesn't have to be for you. Auto white balance also does a great job. I find that shade just gives a little bit nicer skin tones overall. I should also mention that I use shade in natural lit environments like here or out in the world. And then as soon as I get into lighting environments that are inside, maybe LED lights, I switch to auto white balance. Another thing to consider is when inserting a new SD card, the best practice is to format that card in the camera through the menu system. Beyond that, I don't change a whole lot. So just get out there and start creating videos. Thanks for watching, and if you have any suggestions for future video topics, please feel free to put them in the comments below. I'm happy to make those videos. See you next time.